Golf Central, brought to you by TaylorMade.
In a year that many of the events we have grown accustomed to seeing on the PGA Tour have been either rescheduled or canceled, this week is a pleasant surprise as the Workday Charity Open was quickly created and secured at the longtime home of the Memorial Tournament, Muirfield Village Golf Club. This begins 2 straight weeks at Jack Nicklaus's lifetime passion project, a fortunate place for the best men's tour in the world to find itself in the next 2 weeks. With that, good evening. Welcome to Golf Central. If you look at the history of the events played at Muirfield Village, it's roll call for virtually every significant event in golf, individual or team events. This week begins a fortnight, a golf fortnight, 2 weeks, 2 separate events. We start with the Workday Charity Open. Todd Lewis has arrived in Dublin, Ohio. He joins me now. Todd, this club, as you know quite well, can do virtually anything and everything it chooses to. How will they try to differentiate the golf course from week 1 to week 2? And good evening to you.
Well, Gary, good evening to you. And that is the big challenge for not only the maintenance staff here at Muirfield Village, but also for the PGA Tour and the rules officials, and as far as setting up the golf course here to make sure that it is PGA Tour tournament ready in back-to-back weeks. By the way, we are inside right now because there are thunderstorms outside, and that's a good thing. The formula for keeping this golf course healthy this week is to make sure that it gets plenty of water and is well hydrated.
Part of that protecting the golf course is the water that we're putting on it. We're varying teeing grounds throughout the golf course. We'll have different, playing from some different angles, different tees, trying to vary those divot patterns in the fairways. But for the most part, we are treating these as 2 completely different tournaments. You'll see it's not going to be cookie cutter style over the next 2 weeks.
There is a concern in trying to protect this golf course this week for next week. What are you guys targeting? What is the biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge will be the divots in the fairway. We want to make sure that the product for Mr. Nicklaus next week for the Memorial Tournament is just what he expects, and we're trying to deliver that for him. It's been very gracious of him to host us for 2 weeks. And out of respect for him and the tournament itself, we just want to have the conditions appear as pristine as they can be. It certainly is a challenge with 156 plus players this week and 120 plus players next week to maintain that.
Now, the PGA Tour will use a variety of tees, as Gary Young spoke about, over the next 2 weeks, including a new tee on the par 5 15th that will also help the flow of play because this will now lengthen the hole, making it a 3-shot hole for most in the field. Also expect this weekend for the Tour to use an up tee on the par 4 14th, which will give an opportunity for a player to go for this green off the tee, which can be a risky move with water on the right. This up tee, by the way, was used during the 2013 President's Cup, and you heard Gary Young talk about the fact that this will play a little different this week compared to next week. It'll probably play easier. As a matter of fact, the rough is going to be topped at about 3 to 3.5 inches. The green speeds here this week will be at 11 to 11.5 on the stimp, whereas next week they'll be around 13 to 13.5. Gary Young also saying that it'll probably play a shot easier this week compared to next week. Now, after this week's event on the PGA Tour, Monday, the players will not be allowed on the golf course. The grounds crew and the PGA Tour will work on the course to get it ready for the Memorial. And next week, Tour officials can push this golf course a little closer to the edge because there's not a PGA Tour event, obviously, here the following week. And that, of course, will make this course more difficult, which makes the host, Jack Nicklaus, very happy. Gary?
All right, Todd, thank you very much. Well, good news for the women. The 2020 Aberdeen Standard Investments Ladies Scottish Open is on track to take place next month, as well as the AIG Women's British Open. Well, if you're going to talk about that, then you bring on a former champion. Yes, indeed she is, and also an analyst for Golf Channel, and that is Karen Stupples. Stups, it's great to see you. This news, are you surprised by it at all?
I've got to tell you, I really am quite surprised. I think a number of players would be surprised by the news too, because not that long ago, they were just given an email to say, don't book your travel yet. We have a phone call coming up, which is actually tomorrow, with the commissioner to let them know what's going on. And I think for the most part, people were surprised by that because, let's face it, the Open Championship has been cancelled, the Senior Open's been cancelled. And with that 14-day isolation period that was in place, I think it made it very difficult for players to envision a way for it to go forward. But the UK government have relaxed that rule as a special exemption to the LPGA Tour players and their staff and caddies to be able to go in to play these two events.
How much do you think the LPGA, and I know this might sound rhetorical, yes, they need to play these events, they want to play these events. How much do they really need to do this? And what do you think the players' initial thoughts are? And again, you alluded to that call tomorrow where they may get a lot more information.
I mean, really, I feel really bad for the LPGA players because they've had to sit back and watch the PGA Tour start their season again, get out, and by the time the LPGA would have started, the PGA Tour would have played 7 events already. And something to bear in mind, it's been 25 weeks since from when the LPGA had to stop to when they restart. 25 weeks of not crowning a champion. That's 25 weeks of players not having any way to make a living. And quite frankly, I think they were all just getting really itchy to get going and wanting to show that they can play golf. And I think it's a big thing for them to go and play over there in Europe, particularly, because of the golf course as much as anything else. They're playing Royal Troon. And I think the players feel like it's a chance to really showcase their skill on a course that has such good historical value to it.
Karen, there are a lot of hurdles, obviously, and as somebody who knows that region of the world exceptionally well, what are some of the primary hurdles that they have to deal with to pull this off?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to convince the players that it's safe to go. You've got to get all your players on board, knowing that they can go over there in a safe fashion, and that if they get sick, there are contingency plans that would take place for that. Then you have to convince the local community that the chances of them having sort of spread coming out from America is diminished, and that so the community feels that the bubble that the LPGA creates is a good one, so you get the community on board. And then the second one, I think for me is a big one, is the integrity of the AIG Women's British Open, because if you can't get the top players playing, the top ranked players to show up, it becomes less of a tournament. And I really feel like that's a big thing. You have to make sure that you get the top players from Asia, the top players from America, to make that leap and go over there and play. I think that's huge.
Karen, how do you think, if in fact this is achieved, that a championship week at Troon with a fan base that not likely is going to be able to be on the grounds, it will be received by the locals?
Well, I think that the local government there in Scotland has really taken a good forefront lead in this. Fiona Hislop, the cabinet secretary there in Scotland, has really committed to equality in sport and society, and I think that's really good for women's sport in general, that they're actually going to go ahead and do it. I think there's a good feeling surrounding that. I do also feel that there'll be a little bit of nervousness around the community with regards to keeping things safe and not having to go into a lockdown again. And so I think that if the LPGA does a good job in how they talk about this event, what they talk about with the protocols, which I'm sure will be released tomorrow after the phone call that Mike Bond has with his players, I think that'll be a big move. Karen,
last thing on this call, you know, all those players know the healthy stipend that is available to PGA Tour players if, in fact, they test positive and then fulfill all the protocols in the aftermath. Do you think that's going to be one of the first things asked? I think so, too. I think all the players that will be on that phone call with Mike tomorrow are going to have a whole host of questions to ask, that being one of them. And I don't see how they can go over there and play without a provision like that in place. I think another thing you have to think about is the travel arrangements, how the players are going to get from hotel to golf course and limit the impact on the community around them as they travel around to the course. There are so many different things that the players will have to ask Mike come tomorrow on that video call that he's going to have with them all. But I know that, look, at the very least, we're encouraged by the idea that they might be able to do this, but certainly questions needing to be answered. Karen, thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks, Gary. Awesome.